And welcome back for the last hour session of the first day. And so one thing that's really important about React and we really care about is to build real-world applications. And so we want it to be useful for small and big companies. And one thing that you need to do in order to build a real-world application is you need to give it to everyone in the world. And that includes having to translate your application in many, many languages. And so Eric from Yahoo is going to talk about this.
All right, yeah, so afternoon, it's a lot of great talks, but now internationalization. We'll try not to make it dry. Yeah, so has anybody built a web app that they've needed to internationalize, make work? Oh, great. Oh, wow. Like almost everyone. Sweet. So do I have stuff for you? Yeah, so internationalization, for the people who aren't aware, you know, it's basically the process, like in software, it's the process of making a piece of software work in different languages. So basically extracting out the language-specific parts, making sure that it can work if you're trying to serve an application or a website in English or French or whatever languages. So what I want to talk about today is how, so we're using React at Yahoo. There's a lot of teams working on it, a lot in production, a lot not in production yet. But we have to build our sites and our apps to work in many different markets, many different locales and regions and languages. So I want to talk about how we're solving internationalization inside of React at Yahoo. So let's start off with this slide. So I have two pieces of data here. One's a number, one's a date that's been formatted. What number is that? Does anybody know? 1002. Yeah, so some of you are kind of smart here. 1002, yes, like if I was in Spain, that would be 1002. Here in the US, it's 1 and 2 thousandths. So big difference in the number. But what I'm trying to show here is that this is localization. And so localization is like a sibling concept with internationalization. And the idea is to, like a locale is a language and region combination. And so in this case, we're formatting the number. And it's ambiguous. Like you have to know what locale this is in. So if it was in Spanish for Spain, you know, it would be the 1002. In English US, it would be 1.02. So the date, what date is this? Does anybody know? We can't know, right? Like we have to know the locale. So even in English, right, English US, this is February 2nd, or February 1st, yeah, good call. See? It didn't, yeah. So in this country, that date is actually going to be the day that the Patriots win the Super Bowl. I'm from Boston. But yeah, so in England, this is the 2nd of January. Like, you know, just different. But yeah, so I don't want to just like, you know, I want to recognize the fact that there's many people here that are building apps where they really only care about people in the US who speak English. Or they're like a startup, and you know they want to make sure that their product actually is meaningful to somebody before they try to make it meaningful to everybody. So, you know, but if we look at what's going on in the world and languages, English isn't really that popular amongst native speakers. So reading and writing and speaking, 5.2% are native speakers. So this is their English as their first language. And if you look at internet users, and what we see is that this percentage is a lot higher. And we kind of know this like along the developed world, like the US, English is the dominant language. And so we see this number a lot higher than the actual number of native speakers. And this number actually represents for native speakers and then English as a second language. But the thing here is that it's changing, right? This 27% number is going to be eroded down. And that's because people in the developing world are getting access to the internet. So when the next 1 and 2 billion people get online through mobile devices, this is going to really change. But even if you don't care about that, if you just think, well, I don't care. I still only can support English in the US. Localizing properly the content for English in the US is still hard. And so I want to show this example. This is a Flickr photo page that I went to. And if we zoom in here on some of the data, you can see, this might be hard to see in the back, but what we have here is like the number of views, faves, and comments on the photo. So if we look at this deeper, we'll see that 17,576 has a comma separator in the thousands position, and views, faves, and comments are all pluralized. If I only had one comment on this photo, then it would be comment, singular, not plural. So this is very common. Like anytime there's a number, you usually have some sort of label to say what the number is. And depending on what that number value is, you have to pluralize the label. So this is like a pain in the ass, right? We also have a date here. This is just a common date the photo was taken on and what you would expect as how it would be rendered in the US. Over here on the other side of the page, we have some interesting things. So this is, you actually see this on Facebook too. Like, your friends, like Bob and Joe and 300 other people like this. Like you see this all the time. So this is an example of a complex message where you need to change this string based on how many people have actually faved this photo in this case. And if there was only one, then you would have to change this. And then like this just gets complex. And then to make it even harder, what if it was these two people plus 1,200 more, now you have to put a comma in this number. So this is like an example of a complex message, even though it looks very simple and it's something as a user you would just expect to see in an app. For a developer, this is like hard to get right. And then the other thing here we see is a relative time. This is probably really hard to see in the back because it's in gray, but it says 5 months ago. So this comment was posted 5 months ago. So we expect this. We see this everywhere, even on GitHub, right? So when looking at all these things here, what we realize is that this is all about formatting. What we wanted to focus on was the formatting aspect of internationalization. So now to get into, so how do we do this in JavaScript? If we weren't in JavaScript, basically in any other programming language you would use, there's built-in internationalization support in the standard libraries. So how do we do this in JavaScript? Do we just use a bunch of libraries? We could use like moment.js for date-related things. Really what there are is there's like many right answers of how you can do this, and they are literally all on Stack Overflow. Like I went to one. I just did a search for how to print a number. I forget what I searched, but this was the top question on Stack Overflow: how to print a number with commas as 1,000 separators in JavaScript. And there were 25 answers. All of them said different things. One of them actually had code comments for the answer that listed off like all the revisions and who contributed to the revision. And it was just like more than the actual implementation code. But here's a very basic one. It's using a regular expression. This also supports decimals. This was revision 2 of this answer that was rated the highest. But yeah, you could do this, but this would only work in English in the US. But there's a good thing here that a lot of you may not know, which is that JavaScript does have support for some of these things. This is built into ECMAScript 5.1. And what we have is the intl APIs, intl number format, which formats numbers, date time format, which formats dates and times, and collator, which I'm not going to talk about, but that's to deal with sorting strings where they have accents and different things like this. And so what's cool is this is in browsers. So Firefox, Chrome, IE11 even has this. Like IE has this stuff. One that we don't have is Safari, which really sucks because of mobile Safari specifically. But we also do have Node.js as of 0.11. Stephen Loomis from IBM tirelessly wrote this like ginormous pull request going back and forth, finally got this into Node. It's in IO.js 1.0, actually. So these APIs exist in Node, and they work, which is great. They only support English right now, but you can build Node and add more, but we're working on trying to make that better. But there's also a polyfill. So there's a great polyfill called intl.js by Andy Earnshaw, and he went through the spec to a T, implemented number and date time format. He didn't do collator because of the amount of data you need. We really need this stuff baked into the runtimes because you can't expect to load this data over the wire to back these APIs because it's a lot of data to support all the languages. So this is great. And this is how you can use these. So you can create a new intl number format instance and then call format on it and pass it a value. So this would give you 1,000 because it's in my default locale of my operating system, which is in English US. Similarly, if we want a date, if we want to output today's date, you can provide these options to specify exactly how you'd want this thing to be formatted. And what's awesome about this is you can go to Mozilla Developer Network and see the docs for these APIs, like they exist, all the options. It's really great. Now, the problem with this is it's pretty expensive to create one of these number format or date time format instances. So they're really actually prepped to, you create one, you hold on to it, and you reuse it through your application where you want to format like a number as an integer. So the problem with this is like not only is it somewhat expensive, but you have to deal with this bookkeeping. You have to figure out how you're going to manage these instances so that your app is performant because you can't create one every time you need to format a number. Like especially inside of a React render function, you don't want to be calling new intl number format. And you'll notice it pretty quickly if you run some benchmarks on it. And the other thing is that this is imperative. So what would we expect in React? And this will kind of look very similar, but it's nice and declarative. So what I have here are React components, formatted number, and formatted date. And these look very similar to the other APIs. And so this is actually a library that we have called Reactintl. It's on npm install Reactintl, and you can get this. And this is great, right? It's declarative. It's what you would expect. This is what you would want to use. It delegates to the low-level intl built-ins for these two, for number and date time. But really, what we realize is this is not enough. Like we showed the Flickr example. There's relative times. There's pluralization. There's these complex messages. So how are we going to handle that? So relative times. Here's an example. Imagine this is inside of a React parent components render method. And what we have here is the word posted, and we want to format the props, this.props.date as a relative time, and then we get posted 3 hours ago, however much the time is. Like this is what you want to do. When we started figuring this out, we realized that having this high-level declarative library for people to work with, you were able to format the data how you wanted it, exactly where you needed to display it. And we found this to be extremely powerful. There's a problem with this example here, though, which is that I'm hard-coding posted, which is an English word, in this. So if I wanted to internationalize this, I actually need to externalize this string. So now I'm going to talk about string messages. So there's something here that I'm going to show. We didn't make this up, which is this message syntax. So this is part of ICU, which is a project, which is the internationalization components for Unicode. And this is used by everything. This is actually used to back the implementations of intl number format and date time format in the browsers and in Node.js. But this is also backing like all the other programming languages, internationalization features that are built in. And so they came up with this syntax, which is a very basic like string interpolation template syntax. And in this case, you can imagine that name is replaced with some value. The other interesting thing about this is that translators know this syntax. So professional translators who are translating your application-specific strings are aware of this syntax, and if they're not, they can easily learn it. Here's an example where you're outputting somebody's age, and it has this ability to say what kind of formatting you want to do to a value right in line. So I can say age as a number, and by default, it would be an integer. So I just want to show like this syntax, because I'm going to show an example that's slightly more complex next, and that's to do pluralization. So in this case here, I have what I want to output. You can see off to your far right, which is one comment here. And if we just first focus on the React component part, formatted message, it takes some message template and then the number of comments, in this case 1. And now if we look at this message that's defined above, what you would normally do is define this in another file, like your English strings file, for example. And in this case, I'm using ES6 template strings, and this is really just because it's easier to show on the slide than having like quotes and pluses everywhere. But what this is showing is we have a num comments variable. We're defining it as a plural, and then we have basically two options here. And for English, pluralization rules are just two options. There's one, and then there's other. So we have singular, one comment, or other, where it pluralizes the label here. And as part of this syntax, then the hash symbol is just like a shorthand. It will actually put the number value in there, but format it. So when you have something like 1,200 comments, it will put the comma in there for you, or format the 1,000 separator, in this case, however the locale is supposed to, whether a space or a dot. So this actually works out really well. Like we were at Yahoo, we were already using the ICU message syntax to define our strings, and so this was like very easy. Like all we had to do is write a parser and a compiler in JavaScript to do this, and it's actually fairly simple, and it's not much code to do it. So we're really happy that like we didn't have to have any of the rest of the globalization team or tooling or processes we have at Yahoo change to be able to support this, because the translations are in the exact same format. We just had to deal with the runtime of it. So we have these components. So I showed formatted number, formatted date. We also have formatted time, formatted relative for relative times, and formatted message. So that we have one other thing that's part of React-intl that we're using, and this is an intl mixin, which I'll talk about next. So the intl mixin, what you can do is just add it at the top level of your React component hierarchy, and you can pass some like I18N metadata down into your app, and then what we're actually doing is we'll automatically propagate it through the app, so you don't have to thread these values through props all the way down. So for example, like the locales that you want to support, or like, and so basically in this case French, but you can also specify it as an array with fallbacks. So in this case, we're rendering the app, and we're specifying that we want to render this app in French, and here's some price. This is like the most basic app, right? And then in our app, we're using formatted number, and it is automatically using the locale that's been set on app. And so we're using React's context for this to make sure we can just like sort of pipe these things down through the whole hierarchy without you having to thread them yourself. So here's an example, right? Like it renders it out. It renders the correct thousands and decimal separators, and also renders this as, because I've specified when I formatted it, I wanted the currency to be in US dollars. So it formats it how a French person would expect to see the currency US dollars, so we don't see just the $sign in front of it. So this is a basic example of how this mixin works. So this is some more details about the library. So React-intl, it's pretty small. You get all this for 7.7K. If you were to pull down Moment.js, it's like 11K. We support 150 languages with this, which I'll explain how we do that. Nice little trick we have. And English is in there by default. So if you don't care about other languages, this thing's already built for you. Funny story about this is Kerdy, who work with on my team. He is Spanish as his native language, and he's sitting there telling me, stressing me like, dude, we have to make English the default. English is the default language. And I'm like, it's not even your default, but I gave in. It made sense, so we did it. So yeah, this is on NPM. But I want to talk more about a bigger picture thing we have here, and that is this whole project we have is called FormatJS. And so what FormatJS is a set of libraries, one of which is React-intl. So it's a set of libraries for internationalization completely focused on formatting. And we have different layers. So we try to build on standards, and then we have a set of core libraries that fill in the gaps of what we would like to exist in the built-in runtime. And then we have these high-level declarative integrations, one of which for React. We have one for handlebars, one for Dust, and we're working on one that fits in directly with Ember. And the reason that we have all these is we really believe that formatting data in a declarative way is the way to do this. And those are all the template or component libraries that are in use at Yahoo. So we built sort of integrations with all of them. So we're using this. It's open sourced. You can go to FormatJS.io, and we have like a lot more docs and examples and live examples for the React stuff, which I encourage everybody to check out. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit about sort of how we built up this, like the architecture of all this behind Reactintl and FormatJS. Because what we really wanted to do is build on standards. So I'll explain these terms and their role. So at the very bottom of the stack is CLDR. And so CLDR stands for the Common Locale Data Repository. And this is used like industry-wide. This is part of the Unicode consortium. And what they have done is basically all of the world's languages, they figured out like how do they represent dates? How do they represent numbers? What words do they use for days of the week? What words do they use for like tomorrow, yesterday, ago? Everything you could think of is in here. Everything but your application-specific strings, which obviously wouldn't be in here. So we have the CLDR down there. Then we have ICU, which is basically a library mainly written for C, C++, and Java that uses the CLDR data to implement APIs for formatting things and parsing things and all things internationalization. And that's actually what the browsers use. That's what other programming languages use. There's bindings for like PHP and different things. And that's actually what the JS-intl library or intl APIs are using under the hood. So the way that this works is they're really like using parts of the ICU to implement this in the browser and in Node. So what we did is we were building, like we're in JavaScript, so we're building on top of the JavaScript runtime. But what we're doing in the core libraries we have for doing message formatting in relative time is we're using the data that exists in the CLDR. So when you use react-intl, you put react-intl on the page, you get English by default, and then when you need to support, say, French for a specific request, then what you can do is add in just the data pack for this. And it's anywhere between like 300 to 500 bytes per locale, so it's very small. But since we have 150, we don't want to smash them all into one file. So we pulled the data out. And then what we're also doing is we're leveraging the fact that the ICU message syntax, so the syntax that the ICU project came up with for defining messages, has become more or less standardized within the industry. We're leveraging that in our message formatting implementation. So we're really trying to build up on top of these sort of industry standards. But we do have an end game for this. So this is what we eventually want. So we want these libraries built into JavaScript, message formatting and relative time formatting. So we're hoping to use FormatJS as a test bed for figuring this out and eventually propose this as being part of ECMAScript. Me and Carity on my team participated in TC39, and we represent Yahoo in TC39. And we're also becoming owners of the internationalization spec in ECMAScript, which is a separate document from ECMAScript proper. And what we want to do is eventually figure out, work with everybody, get feedback from all of you, really try to see if we have something here so that we could eventually get this built into the JavaScript runtimes. And that is really our end goal with this entire product. Yeah, so please check out the website. It looks pretty beautiful. Actually, somebody made it like beautiful open source project of the week or something I saw. But yeah, it looks really nice. It's all built in React for the examples and stuff. And then you can see the examples for all of Reactintl. And any questions?
Hey, I know for me that internationalizing a large application has been sort of an eye-opening way to learn about different cultures and learn about things I would have never known. And one of those things is abbreviating numbers. If you have, 1,200,003, in this culture, we might abbreviate that as 1.2 M, right? Mm-hmm. In different cultures, they might actually say 1,200 thousandths. That blew my mind. And that's actually sort of non-trivial. Do you have a strategy for abbreviating numbers and in a low-calorie way?
Yeah, so we we don't have a specific API for this. I'm trying to think if the intl number format supports this. My guess is going to be no. But we are looking into this, and I know that the data does exist in the CLDR. So I know it's possible. We just haven't implemented it. But if you're interested in working on that, we'd be happy to work with you on it.
Exactly. I knew that was coming. And I'd be happy to.
That was a great talk, and I really appreciate you working on those libraries. There's something that is possible to do in traditional systems that are generating markup that I haven't seen anybody address in React, and that is how you translate a message that has markup in it. So like you have a sentence, and part of that sentence is a link. Or we've even seen part of it's italic, but in another language, that becomes two italicized phrases and things like that. So are you doing any work on that kind of thing, or have any advice for that?
Yeah, Reactintl actually supports that in two possible ways. This is something we just finally got out last week. So I didn't put in the advanced examples. We do have these exact examples on the website, but I can talk through them really quickly. So basically, what you'll want to do is use the formatted message component, and you can put in a simple placeholder. So for example, you could put name, and say you want to make the name bold. And what you can do is in the value that you pass to the name prop to the formatted message component that you're creating, you just put in curly braces, because you're going to put nested JSX element in there, and make its value be just angle brackets B, angle brackets, the name, close tag. And it'll work. It'll put it in there where actually we look through to see if any of the values that you want to put inside of the message are other React elements, and then we split the message apart so that React's diffing algorithm can properly deal with the fact that there's like nested elements that you want to put in the messages. So, and then there's one other way we have, which is if you can't do that for whatever reason, like you can't pass in React elements as values, then what you can do, if you have to have the HTML in the specific string message that will be translated, then we have an HTML message component where we escape everything but the message itself, because we assume it comes from a trusted source, which is you. But we escape all the values because they could be UCG, and then we do dangerously set inner HTML. But we don't advise to use that because it also basically you have to opt out of the diffing algorithm on that one.
Thanks.
Yep. Anyone else? All right, thanks.